Herewith we present an Almanac, containing a variety of new, useful, and entertaining matter, pleasing to men of all humors. Today, our guide is Charles Schwartz, photographer, illustrator, and biologist for the Missouri Conservation Commission.
When a farmer plants a crop, he has to do a number of things to his land. He has to condition his soil to receive this crop, and he does this in a number of ways. One of the ways he does is to use chemical means, and the other physical means. He breaks the soil up into fine particles so that rain and snowfall can percolate down into the soil and give the little microorganisms down there the moisture they need to carry on their life activities. Another thing the farmer does is break up the soil so that the roots of his crop will be able to penetrate out into the soil and seek the nutrients that they require. Another thing he does is to sometimes mulch the soil so as to prevent evaporation. And if he's enterprising, he actually adds fertilizers to the soil so as to make it more nutritious, so that his crop will be a better crop and give a better yield. Now, nature also plants crops. And nature's been planting crops for thousands, even millions of years. And the things she does are the very things that man does. Or rather, perhaps I should say, man has probably learned his things from nature. But in man's haste to become civilized, he has probably forgotten many of these things that nature does and the reasons why she does them. Now, nature, in planting her crops and conditioning this soil in this way, uses a lot of different vehicles. And one of these things she uses is the wildlife that lives on the land. She uses all sorts of things. Now, I have one of these things that nature uses, and I'm going to show it to you. This is one of nature's principal soil conditioners. Now, this isn't a mole. This is a pocket gopher. Now, a pocket gopher is a combination dynamo, tractor, bulldozer, soil conditioner, fertilizer, tractor, and cultivator, and disker, and harrow are all put into one. But because there aren't enough people who actually are acquainted with this animal, I'm going to put him aside for a minute and talk about an animal that we are a little more familiar with. I'm going to talk about cattle. Now, these cattle feeding out here in this pasture are taking plants which have grown from the soil, and they are converting these plants into protein or beef. And when, in the process of this, the cattle pass off waste products like urine and fecal matter, insects like these tumblebugs take over and start to break up this matter so that soil organisms like the tiny microbes and bacteria and fungi and nematodes can go about their work. And even the tumblebugs disperse this fertilizer throughout the fields. Now, this rabbit goes through the same stages that the cow is going through in the course of its life. But the coyote here further complicates this picture, because this rabbit now sees this coyote and seeks cover. The coyote watches and has located the rabbit. And the rabbit, unable to bear the suspense of this coyote being so close, gives itself away, and the coyote takes after it. Now watch this coyote close in on the rabbit. The rabbit is frantically seeking to escape the coyote by dodging, but it doesn't have much chance out here in the very open where there is no cover. And the coyote heads him off and makes the kill rather easily. Now, this coyote is going to convert the rabbit into coyote food or meat. The rabbit actually used plant material and converted plant material into rabbit material. Now the coyote is doing the same to itself. And this coyote will give off waste products, and because coyotes don't live forever, this coyote will eventually die, and its body will return to the soil and be worked upon and broken down by all the organisms that go to do this type of thing. Just like this sparrow here is being converted into organic soil material by these yellowjackets. Now, when a plant, like a tree, dies, the little creatures like these sow bugs start to work on it and break it down. And the fungus and slime molds that we see here, these light-colored things growing on this plant, also work to disintegrate and digest and break down the plant material. And creatures like this snail work and feed on these fungi and convert them into snail food, and the snail in turn would die someday and return its body back to the soil. Now, we've seen some of the ways in which nature operates to condition the soil, but there are many other ways in which nature does these things. We've only seen part of the picture, and she uses many other kinds of creatures. Now, I've got one here, perhaps the most important creature on this earth as far as soil conditioning is concerned. These little things, most of us recognize because we've used them or seen them on the end of a fish hook. These little earthworms here do tremendous good. They don't do any harm. They do an awful lot of good in conditioning this soil. Now, an earthworm lives in the soil, and he's always active. I don't think they can sleep. But an earthworm tunnels through the soil, and when he does this, he breaks the soil up and aerates it and permits moisture to get down into it. And he makes pathways or little tunnels which the plant roots can get down into and find better nutrients. But another thing this earthworm does is this. When the soil is too compacted, the earthworm actually eats his way into the soil and ingests soil. And in so doing, he conditions his soil into a better state than it was before he took it in. And he dumps the soil out on top of the land. So much so that on an acre of land occupied by earthworms, it has been estimated that these worms in the course of a year actually turn over at least 17 tons of soil. Just keep it frothing and turning it over. Now, that's a very subtle type of thing, and we can't see it. And I can't even show you these earthworms working here because they're too small and they're too slow. But I would like to show you one of the creatures that I mentioned earlier, this little pocket gopher here, and show you how he works the soil, because he represents or stands for all animals, in a sense, as far as soil conditioners. Now, this little guy, he's quite agitated here, but I want to tell you something about him. These big, strong claws are his principal digging agents. These front feet of his with these powerful shoulders. His hind feet now are quite small, but they aid in his digging. And he has little tiny eyes. Of course, he's nearsighted. He doesn't have to see because he spends most of his time tunneling underneath the ground. And his ears are so small, and they have little valves, that the earth cannot get into them. And the gopher's little tail is an important thing because he spends a lot of his time going backwards and forwards, as well as forwards in his tunnels. And he uses this little tail as a tactile organ to kind of guide him along in his way that he travels. Now, I want to show you just how this little fellow works. And I'm going to place him over here in this soil and let him go. Now just watch him start to dig his little burrow. Now, gopher sometimes gets himself in trouble because he likes to eat plants, and sometimes he gets into an alfalfa field or a legume field and causes a lot of trouble. Farmers don't like this, but he does an awful lot of good too. He's a regular bulldozer. Look at him go. He's practically out of sight. Now he's coming up on the surface of the land here, and he's bringing soil out that he has excavated in the process of making his tunnel. Watch him push this soil out, this subsoil, bringing it up to the surface. He's as energetic as any creature can be. He makes a little tunnel, and then he must push the dirt out that he's excavated. And he does this simply by pushing it up with his strong forequarters. Watch him work. And now we see it in a cross-section, so to speak, and we can see the little gopher pulling this earth, which he's excavating, out onto the top of the land. He packs it down for a minute, holds it firmly in place with his body, and then returns for another load. Now look at this. He doesn't spend much time on the top of the land. He hasn't time to, and if he did, he'd probably be snatched up by some animal like a hawk. Now he's working here. He's excavating this tunnel a little further and pushing the dirt out. Notice how he pushes this soil up and brings it up, and in such fine, tiny particles. Now he's bringing subsoil up. And this is a wonderful way in which this gopher contributes to the... Uh-oh, look at him here. He's got a big soil concretion, and it's a little too much for him. He can't handle that too easily. But he'll get it out of there, along with these other fine particles, to help condition the soil. Now he's got it in place, and he's going to bring soil underneath and pack it. You see, after he gets his tunnel made sufficient depth and gets enough of this soil out, he has to plug up the opening to keep animals like weasels or snakes out. And also, I think he has an air conditioning system. And so here we see him as he's plugging up his tunnel. He's finally gotten it plugged up. And all the now watch here. He's working from the bottom, and watch how he uses his hips to push and force that soil into place. He's a regular little bulldozer. Look at that little tail of his that helps guide him backwards too. He needs a little more soil to plug this sufficiently. There. Now he braces himself and forces and pushes with all his might. This little earth conditioner. He even adds bodily waste to the soil and helps fertilize this land that he aerates too. And all we see now, after he has his tunnel plugged up, is the little mound of dirt up on top. Now, it seems to me that when we look at these creatures like this gopher and think of how all of these animals that I've talked about help benefit the soil and condition it, that, at least to me, it's sometimes difficult to understand just how they can be so important. The best way to do that, at least to me, the best way, is to consider not one individual, not one gopher, or not one earthworm, or not one beetle or coyote or rabbit, but to think of these things in their entirety. Think of all these animals, all together, not just in one generation, but for the thousands of generations in the past, everything up to the present, and consider how all of these animals have contributed to the making of this land and making it so productive. Now, they are not the only agency, but they are largely responsible for a lot of the fertility in our soil. And when I think of this, I begin to understand that our land, the land, really needs wildlife. Because, after all, wildlife is the land.